What if everything you thought you were watching wasn't the full story? Because right now, the internet is locked in on three names you already know: Cardi B, Stefon and Young Miami. And somehow, what started as quiet curiosity has turned into one of the most talked about situations online. At first, it didn't look like anything serious, just normal celebrity movement, public appearances, social media moments, the kind of thing people scroll past every day. But then, something shifted. Small details started catching attention. Timelines didn't fully match. Energy felt different. And suddenly, people weren't just watching anymore. They were questioning everything. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because this isn't about one viral clip or one obvious moment. This is about patterns, repeated overlaps, conversations happening behind the scenes, or at least that's what people are starting to believe. And once that idea hit the internet, everything changed. No confirmations, no clear answers, just reactions, silence, and a growing sense that something bigger might be unfolding where nobody expected it. So the real question is, what actually happened behind closed doors? At the beginning, none of this looked like a story anyone needed to pay attention to. There was no big announcement, no viral moment, no headline forcing people to stop and ask questions. Everything surrounding Cardi B and Stefon seemed normal, or at least normal enough for two high-profile names constantly moving in the public eye. They were showing up, living their lives, doing what celebrities do: events, appearances, moments caught on camera. From the outside, nothing felt out of place. If anything, it looked smooth, controlled, almost too smooth. And that's exactly where the first layer of curiosity started building. Because when something looks perfect for too long, people start looking closer. Not because there's proof something is wrong, but because patterns begin to stand out in ways they didn't before. At first, it was subtle. Small timing differences. Moments where one person appeared somewhere that didn't fully line up with what people expected. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you could point at and say, that's it. Just small inconsistencies that didn't seem important on their own. But the thing about small inconsistencies is this: when they repeat, they stop feeling random. And that's when the internet does what it always does. It starts connecting dots. Now, at this stage, nobody was making major claims. There were no accusations, no loud reactions, no public tension. Just quiet observation, people noticing things, comparing timelines, watching movements more closely than before. And then, slowly, another name began to enter the conversation: Young Miami. At first, it didn't mean anything. Because in the world these people move in, overlap is normal. The same parties, the same events, the same circles. Celebrities cross paths all the time without it meaning anything deeper. That's just how the industry works. So when her name showed up, it wasn't treated as something serious. Not yet. But then it showed up again. And again, not in a loud way. Not in a way that immediately grabbed headlines, but enough that people started noticing a pattern forming. Not just random overlap, but repeated presence in similar spaces, similar timelines, similar moments. And once repetition enters the picture, everything starts to feel different. Because now it's no longer just coincidence. At least, that's how it starts to look from the outside. People began going back, revisiting old clips, looking at past appearances, checking who was where and when. Moments that once felt completely ordinary suddenly started being viewed through a new lens. And that lens changes everything. A party isn't just a party anymore. It's a possible connection point. A shared location isn't just random. It becomes a potential link. A moment that once meant nothing suddenly feels like it could mean something. And the more people looked, the more those moments seemed to exist. Now here's where things take a deeper turn. Because up until this point, everything was still happening publicly. Everything people were talking about came from things that could be seen, tracked, or revisited. But then the conversation started shifting away from what was visible to what might have been happening behind the scenes. And that's where speculation really begins to grow. There were no confirmed leaks, no verified messages, nothing concrete that could be held up as undeniable proof. But that didn't stop the narrative from evolving. Because instead of facts, people started focusing on behavior. How people were moving, how communication appeared to change, how certain interactions felt different compared to before. And behavior is tricky because it can be interpreted in 100 different ways, depending on what someone already believes. Some people saw nothing unusual. Others saw signs of distance. Others saw something that looked like quiet tension building over time. And once those different interpretations start spreading, the story stops being one single version of events. It becomes multiple narratives happening at the same time. But through all of that, one idea kept gaining momentum, that something wasn't as simple as it looked. Because when everything lines up perfectly on the surface, but feels slightly off underneath, people start assuming there's more going on that they can't see. And that assumption is powerful. Now at this point, something else began to stand out. Not just who was being seen, but how things were being handled. Because instead of immediate reactions, instead of quick responses or clear statements, there was space, silence, time passing without anything being directly addressed. And in situations like this, silence doesn't calm things down. It does the opposite. It gives people room to think, to question, to build their own explanations. And once that happens, the narrative starts growing faster than any actual information. Because now, it's no longer about what's confirmed. It's about what feels possible. And what feels possible can quickly start to feel real. Meanwhile, the attention kept building. More people started paying attention. More conversations started forming. Social media began amplifying every detail, every theory, every observation. The situation wasn't contained anymore. It was expanding. And as it expanded, something else started happening. The tone shifted. What started as curiosity slowly turned into suspicion. Not aggressive, not explosive, but noticeable. Because people weren't just asking what's going on anymore. They were asking, why does this feel off? And that question is what pushed everything forward. Because once a situation reaches that point, it's very hard to go backwards. You can't unsee patterns. You can't unnotice timing. You can't ignore things that suddenly feel connected, even if they might not be. And that's exactly where this story found itself. Right in the middle of uncertainty. No clear answers, no confirmed details. Just a growing sense that something, whatever it was, might be unfolding quietly, out of public view. And the more that idea spread, the more attention it pulled in. Because people weren't just watching anymore. They were waiting for a reaction, waiting for a statement, waiting for something that could either confirm everything or shut it all down. But that moment didn't come. At least, not yet. And when that kind of moment doesn't arrive, something else takes its place. Speculation becomes stronger, theories become more detailed, and the story keeps moving forward, even without proof. Because at the end of the day, what keeps a situation like this alive isn't facts. It's the feeling that there's something just beneath the surface that hasn't been revealed yet. And as long as that feeling exists, people keep watching, they keep analyzing, they keep asking the same question in different ways. What is actually happening here? And why does it feel like we're only seeing part of it? Then what comes next is where those patterns start turning into something much harder to ignore. By the time the conversation reached this point, it wasn't quiet anymore. What started as small observations had now turned into something people were actively watching in real time. Not just scrolling past, but paying attention to. And when that kind of attention locks in, every single detail starts carrying more weight than it normally would. Because now, it's not just about what's happening. It's about what it might mean. And that shift is where everything begins to intensify. The focus moved away from random moments and onto timing. Who was where? When they were there? And more importantly, who else was in the same place at the same time? That's when the name Young Miami started showing up in a way that felt harder to ignore. Not loud, not obvious, but consistent. And consistency changes the way people interpret everything. Because one overlap, that's coincidence. Two, still explainable. But when it keeps happening, when the same names appear in similar spaces, across different moments, people stop brushing it off so easily. They start asking different questions. Now it becomes, is this random or is this intentional? And once that question enters the conversation, everything starts getting analyzed at a deeper level. People began revisiting timelines more seriously, looking beyond surface-level appearances, trying to piece together sequences that weren't clearly laid out in front of them. Moments that once felt disconnected suddenly started forming what looked like a possible chain. Not confirmed, not proven, but connected enough to keep people watching. At the same time, something else started happening behind the scenes, or at least that's what the internet began to believe. Because the conversation wasn't just about locations anymore, it started shifting toward interactions. The idea that there may have been communication happening privately. Again, nothing verified, no screenshots, no recordings, no direct evidence, but the idea of it was enough. Because once people believe conversations might exist that they haven't seen, everything changes. Now it's no longer about what's visible, it's about what's hidden. And what's hidden always feels more important than what's in plain sight. That's when the word started floating around more seriously. Leaks. Not confirmed leaks. Not public releases. Just talk. That certain conversations had been seen, discussed, or passed around in smaller circles. And that idea alone pushed the situation into a completely different space. Because now, the narrative wasn't just built on patterns anymore. It was built on possibility of proof. And that's a powerful shift. Because even without actual evidence, the suggestion that evidence exists somewhere makes people believe the story is closer to being real. And once that belief spreads, it's almost impossible to contain. At the center of all of this, attention slowly started turning toward Cardi B. Not because she had confirmed anything, but because people were watching her reactions. Or more specifically, the change in her reactions. Because up until now, everything had felt controlled, measured, carefully handled. But then something shifted. It wasn't one big moment, not one clear statement, not one direct call-out. It was a series of smaller signals. Tone, energy, the way things were being said, or not said. And for people paying close attention, it felt different. Less distant, more personal. Like the situation wasn't just being observed anymore, but felt. And that's what made people stop and really look. Because when someone goes from silence to subtle reaction, it usually means something internally has already changed, even if they don't say it directly. And that's exactly what people believed they were seeing. Not confirmation, but impact. At the same time, something else started adding pressure to the entire situation. Silence, from the other side. Because while attention around Stefon Diggs and Young Miami kept growing, there were no clear responses coming from either of them. No statements, no denials. No attempts to directly address what was being discussed. And in situations like this, silence doesn't stay neutral. It gets interpreted. Some people saw it as nothing, others saw it as avoidance, others saw it as confirmation without words. And that's the problem with silence. It allows every interpretation to exist at the same time, which means the narrative keeps expanding instead of narrowing down. Now the conversation had reached a point where it wasn't just about what happened. It was about what people believed happened. And belief spreads faster than facts, especially online. At this stage, the situation had grown far beyond a few observations. It had turned into a full-scale discussion. Different sides forming, different opinions clashing. Some people completely convinced that the patterns meant something real. Others pushing back, saying everything was being overanalyzed, that coincidences were being turned into connections, that speculation was being mistaken for truth. And that divide only made the situation bigger. Because now it wasn't just a story, it was a debate. And debates don't fade quickly. They pull more people in, more perspectives, more theories, more attention. And as that attention kept growing, so did the level of detail people were looking for. It wasn't enough to just point out overlaps anymore. Now people wanted specifics, exact timelines, clear sequences, anything that could either confirm or completely break the narrative. But instead of clarity, what they got was more complexity. because every new detail seemed to raise more questions instead of answering the old ones. And that's when something else started becoming noticeable. The feeling that this wasn't random, not in the sense of confirmed action, but in the sense of effort. Because certain discussions began suggesting that if something was happening, it wasn't accidental. It would require planning, coordination, intent, private settings, controlled environments, moments that wouldn't be visible to the public eye. And that idea added another layer to everything. Because now, the situation wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. And strategy implies choice, which makes everything feel more serious, even without proof. At the same time, public behavior continued to be analyzed. Every appearance, every post, every interaction, nothing felt small anymore. Because once a situation reaches this level of attention, even the smallest detail can shift the entire narrative. And people were watching for exactly that. A shift. A moment. Something that could finally tip everything in one direction or the other. But that moment still hadn't come. And that's what kept the tension alive. Because when something feels like it's building toward a breaking point, but never quite gets there, people don't lose interest. They lean in even more, trying to catch it before it happens, trying to understand it before it's explained. And that's exactly where things stood. Right on the edge of something that felt like it could become clear at any moment, but never fully did. Which only made it more intense. Because now the biggest question wasn't just what happened. It was how much of it hasn't been seen yet, and whether whatever is still hidden is eventually going to come out, or stay exactly where it is, behind the scenes. Because if was where speculation turned into something that felt almost real, then what comes next is where everything either holds together or completely falls apart. By the time we get to this point, the story has reached a stage where it's impossible to ignore. What started as casual observation has now transformed into a full-on spectacle, a situation that's being dissected, not just online, but in every corner of celebrity commentary. Every moment, every glance, every subtle reaction is being scrutinized for clues. And this is where things begin to feel unavoidable. Because when people are paying attention this closely, small actions aren't small anymore. A message deleted too quickly, a phone call taken privately, a public appearance that feels slightly off. Suddenly, these are signs, signals, hints at something bigger happening behind closed doors. And with the names Cardi B, Stefon Diggs, and Young Miami all connected in the conversation, the public's imagination runs wild. It's no longer enough to assume coincidence, because at this point, patterns dominate perception. Private dinners, overlapping schedules, appearances in the same exclusive spaces, conversations that seem too familiar, moments that don't match public narratives. All of it begins to form a web that people can't ignore. And the key element is timing. When multiple events appear to align perfectly, it's almost impossible for the audience to believe nothing is happening. Even without proof, the implication becomes enough to hold attention. At this stage, online discussions start spinning faster. Old clips resurface. Posts are revisited. Public statements, or the lack thereof, are analyzed like evidence. Every silence is loud. Every word, every emoji, every caption is scrutinized. The tension escalates further when Cardi B, after weeks of quiet observation, begins to react. Not directly, not by confirming or denying anything, but through tone, energy, and subtle shifts in behavior. The audience notices. The narrative shifts again. Now, it's not speculation anymore. It feels personal. It feels real. Meanwhile, Stefon Diggs and Young Miami remain silent. No clarifications, no statements. That silence amplifies the drama. In situations like this, absence of response is often interpreted as confirmation by default, and it keeps the story alive, feeding speculation. People divide into sides. One side believes the patterns are too consistent to ignore. The other side insists this is how online rumors spiral out of control. Neither side can fully prove their argument, which makes the debate almost as compelling as the situation itself. And that debate brings another layer, Effort versus emotion. If something is happening, it isn't accidental. Planning, coordination, intent, all implied. Public behavior is no longer just for show. Every appearance, every interaction is analyzed as deliberate. The story grows deeper because the audience begins to interpret every choice as evidence. Now, the narrative isn't just about relationships or personal drama, it's about perception itself. The perception that a private interaction might exist, even if it's unverified, is enough to change everything. Because perception moves faster than facts. And once perception takes hold, the audience begins to treat it as reality. By this point, online attention isn't passive, it's active. Fans, commentators, and casual viewers alike are piecing together timelines, scrutinizing interactions, and drawing conclusions. The story lives in this gray space between known facts and assumed truths, and that's precisely what gives it power. Old appearances, once innocent, now feel calculated. Silences, once shrugged off, now carry weight. Messages, posts, travel schedules, all analyzed with new significance. And the energy around Cardi B is the most telling of all. People notice when someone doesn't return to normal. When reactions change permanently, it's a signal that something has already shifted internally, whether confirmed or not. Meanwhile, the tension between Stefon Diggs and Young Miami adds fuel to the narrative. Their silence, overlaps, and presence in shared spaces suggest connections that may never be fully explained publicly. That lack of closure is exactly what keeps people engaged. And the cycle continues. Speculation leads to scrutiny. Scrutiny leads to deeper speculation. Observers dissect behavior. They interpret tone, timing, and subtle cues. And the story grows with each interpretation, feeding itself in real time. By the end of Part 3, the audience isn't just watching a situation, they're participating in it. They're invested in patterns, in perceived signals, in potential leaks, in every subtle shift. They are caught in a narrative where clarity may never arrive, yet the story still dominates conversation. Because at this stage, the biggest question isn't what happened, it's what hasn't been revealed yet. And the anticipation of that unknown is what keeps the attention unrelenting, keeping the narrative alive long after the initial events occurred. Every action, every pause, every reaction, all are now viewed through the lens of possibility. And in that space, the story continues to grow, almost unstoppable, as long as people are watching, interpreting, and believing something is unfolding just beyond sight. This is the point where the audience realizes the story is bigger than any single interaction. It's a living narrative, fueled by observation, interpretation, and perception. And until there's clarity, if there ever is, the speculation will continue, keeping everyone waiting, analyzing, and questioning what truly. And that's where we leave things for now. But remember, this story isn't over. With so many unanswered questions and so many pieces still behind the scenes, the narrative continues to unfold every day. If you've been following along, you already know how quickly things can shift. Patterns appear, moments get analyzed, and what seemed calm yesterday can explode into conversation tomorrow. And that's exactly why staying connected matters. So here's what you can do. Hit that subscribe button to stay updated on every development, every reaction, and every new perspective as this situation continues to evolve. Turn on notifications so you're always first to know when the next chapter drops. We also want to hear from you. Comment below with what you think is really happening. Who's being honest? Who's staying quiet? Which moments stand out to you the most? Your thoughts could be part of the conversation, shaping how this story is seen by everyone watching. And finally, give this video a like if you've been intrigued by the twists, the timing, and the tension building behind the scenes. Every action helps keep the discussion alive. Stay tuned, stay curious, and don't blink. Because in this story, anything can happen next.